Director of African American Studies and an instructor in the Religious Studies Department. And welcome to our conversation about Ferguson. This is a conversation, it's your conversation. We have faculty here who are speaking from the expertise of their disciplines, but this is your conversation. As students here on our campus, we're sure that you have thoughts about what you have seen in the last 30 days, and we'd like to hear them. So please do participate in the conversation. Here's how we will do this. We'll give a few facts about what we know, just a very few. And we're going to do that because we want to start off at a relatively common place. As we've talked about the topic, certainly in my class, and I'm sure in some of yours, people are getting their information from a variety of sources. Is that right? Social media, who only got their information from social media? Only. Okay? Sort of liberal, we'll call liberal news streams. MSNBC, okay? All right, for example. Only more conservative, perhaps. Okay? And sort of what we hope to be sort of mainstream, Washington Post, New York Times, although some people would put those on the left, I'm sure. And CNN. Okay, very good. So we have a variety of sources, a variety of news sources. In some of my classes, I had some students who only had who would only obtain their news from social media. So we will sort of try to come to a common place. Our speakers today will speak very briefly. First, Dr. Cheryl Monday from the Psychology Department, who is also a member of the African American Studies Faculty Advisory Committee. We have some other members here today as well, please. Identify here. And then our second speaker will be Dr. Charles Wilson, who, in addition to being an assistant professor here, is also a former police chief for the city of Detroit. So let's get started in the conversation. We had a couple of flyers distributed on this event. 2 different flyers. Okay. Both of these are credited from Time magazine. This was their cover story. 2 different flyers, 2 different perspectives. All right? At least 2 in the room. So what we believe to be true at this point is that on August 9th, 30 days ago today, right about this hour, Michael Brown and a friend were walking down the street in Ferguson, Missouri, and were told to get out of the street by a police officer who came upon them. What we believe we know happened at that point is where things get quite muddy. What ensued is that 18-year-old Michael Brown, who, according to St. Louis County Police Force, was an unarmed 18-year-old black male who was shot at least 6 times and was killed in that shooting. Okay, just the facts. After August 9th, on August 10th, there were a series of news conferences, and on the night of August 10th, there was the first of a 2-week series of protests. Right? Just the facts? Right? Okay? In those 2 weeks, a number of activities occurred, including civil unrest, There was some looting on at least one occasion, perhaps two. There were protesters from the local area. There were protesters who streamed into Ferguson, Missouri over the next 2 weeks. A social media campaign ensued in which people began to identify themselves with conversation around what is represented in these two images. Right? Okay? Right. I'm forgetting the date exactly, but on or about August 28th, we had the funeral for Michael Brown. And the conversation has continued, both in Ferguson and around the country. And we want to continue the conversation with your thoughts in this hour. Do we need to fill in any more facts?
I have a question. You said we're going to talk about our feelings about what happened, or we got to ask questions?
Well, we're going to let our speakers speak first, and then whatever questions or whatever you'd like to add to the dialogue is where we'll go.
Did you want to preface that question that you mentioned?
No.
Well, thank you all for coming. I think this is a very important dialogue and conversation that we're having. So I want to talk with you just about some personal reflections that, of course, are shaped by my background as a psychologist and a clinical psychologist. And in particular, I want to just think about 3 questions. And these are questions that I thought about that I also heard other people raise as we have experienced these last 30 days. So the first question, relevant to all of what happened after Michael Brown was shot in terms of the protest, is why now and why Ferguson? In other words, how do we understand that in Ferguson, Missouri, with the shooting of Michael Brown, we saw so much protest and so much national attention? The second question is, how do we understand the deep emotional and very personal reaction that many people had to this? I don't know Michael Brown. I'm sure many of the people in Ferguson who were protesting didn't know Michael Brown. But it seems to have really resonated with all of us in a very personal way. And then lastly, I just want us to think a little bit about the question, is protest enough? And where do we go from here? So let me start with the first question of why now, why Ferguson? Because I think it helps us to think about the context within which people are responding to what happened to Michael Brown. One of the things I read about on Sunday is that the Justice Department has initiated an investigation into the Ferguson Police Department and to potentially all the police departments in St. Louis County. Now this is different from the FBI investigation into his death as a matter of civil rights or violation of his civil rights. The reason why this has struck me is because it's a look at the practices and patterns of policing in that community that might be discriminatory. So that part of what's being raised here is what kind of a community is Ferguson, what kind of a place is it for people to live, particularly in relationship to the police department, and I think by extension to some extent to the power structure in the county. One of the things the article noted was that if you're African American and living in Ferguson and those communities, you're 40% more likely to be pulled over for traffic stops in each of these municipalities. There are a number of small municipalities in the county, I think it's like 70. So if you drive from one to another, the chances of you being pulled over if you're African American are considerably higher than if you're not. So let's think about what that might mean. So imagine that you work at the Kroger's at 15 Mile and Woodward, and you're going to work from here. You get pulled over at 7 Mile and Woodward, and you're into Ferndale, and you get pulled over again. Maybe you make it to Pleasant Ridge, and you get pulled over again, because Pleasant Ridge has a different police department patrolling the streets. perhaps you make it to Huntington Woods, then you're in Royal Oak, then you're in Berkeley, and then you're in Birmingham. Well, this is a hypothetical, right? And the chances that you get pulled over in every municipality might be slim, but you get the idea of what I'm talking about. So let's think about what the impact of that would be. If you got pulled over in each of those municipalities, we're talking 20 minutes, a half an hour, a ticket, perhaps a fine you'd have to pay, perhaps the possibility of a court appearance. And the impact of that, at least for that day, would be what? That's a real question. If it were me, I'd be pretty stressed. Right? I'd be stressed at the first stop, much less the second or third. And you'd be late for work by at least 2 hours. Those are the immediate consequences, but then you would have more long-term consequences in terms of what that might mean to you financially, what that might mean to you in terms of your private record, how you manage that stress, etc. So I don't want to suggest that this is, I'm not suggesting what in fact happens in these counties, but the fact that we have these investigations going on suggests that there's some evidence for these types of evidence to exist. But what I want us to think about is the nature of the community, or what that contributes to the life in the community when you have these kinds of practices. And I think there's a psychological concept that can be helpful to us here, which is a concept developed by Chester Pierce to talk about stress, family stress in particular. And it's called mundane extreme environmental stress, or MEES. So one of the things that Pierce says is that mundane extreme environments are the kind of environments that African American families, particularly low-income families, live in. And these are environments in which racism and subtle oppression are ubiquitous, constant, and continuing as opposed to an occasional distinction. So it's mundane because these are routine occurrences that one can come to expect. It's extreme because the cumulative effect can be pretty debilitating, both personally and otherwise. And it's extreme because it's highly unpredictable. So I think this is a helpful way for us to think about what it is about Ferguson and similar communities that sort of primes people or predisposes people in terms of their vulnerability when these kinds of situations occur. Because if this is a characteristic of the landscape of the environment, it means that people are really dealing with both mundane and extreme stress all of the time. Does that make sense to you? So as I thought about this, what it also raises then is the question, well, yeah, but still there's something about all of this that really resonated very personally with me, and I'm assuming with other people as well. And so that gets to the point of why is it that we have these personal responses that we do? And I think part of it has to do with the fact that this idea of this environmental stress and this experience is ubiquitous with many people in African American communities. That is both the personal experience and the knowledge that other people have had these experiences on an occasional and sometimes frequent basis. It also raises then the traumatic effect of both these experiences and in particular what it's like to lose someone violently in a sudden violent death. What it's like to even know someone that's died suddenly by violent means, and how traumatic that can be, even witnessing that. And we know from what we know about trauma and the health effects of trauma, that this really can contribute to people have reactions of depression, anxiety, and worry, and even anger. So I think that when we see, I know when I saw this situation, and in particular, the first concern about it naturally was the fact that this was a young man who was shot, and then sort of it was just there in the street. A lot of people witnessed it, and then he was there in the street, and people had to experience that. That it rings a personal bell because of the worry I think that people have. That even in a mundane and extreme environment, environmental situation could become potentially traumatic. Then it could result in something much more serious than a traffic stop. And so there is this quality to it that becomes very personal and very moving. The other thing we know about trauma is that trauma, we think of trauma as something, as an experience that's life-threatening, or threatening of serious injury, either to ourselves, something that we witness, or someone close to us. And that part of what's so difficult about something that's truly traumatic is that it strains our capacity to cope, that it feels overwhelming, and that by definition we feel powerless to manage the situation. So there's this component of unpredictability about it. So I think that part of what we see in Ferguson, not only why Ferguson and why now, but also the way that we respond to it personally, has to do with the coming together of these two ideas, these two phenomena. The idea that people may be experiencing these kinds of environments and stresses that have a cumulative effect, and that it sort of echoes with us in terms of our own personal experience, as well as the worry that we could have that experience, and that it could be that traumatic. So, the last thing I want to talk about for you, because I know I'm not supposed to be giving a speech, is what do we do now after the protest? And is protest enough? And I think there's no question that mass demonstrations and protests really empower communities. That we'd have to wonder if that hadn't happened, what would be going on in Ferguson right now? Would there be an FBI investigation? Would there be all of the talk and developments in terms of community relationships? I kind of doubt it, but who knows? But I think one of the things I wondered about with this situation in Ferguson, as I viewed it through the media, was a question of leadership. Not only representation, or community representation in the police department, but leadership. And I think I found, many people found, State Trooper Captain Ron Johnson a bright light in terms of emerging leadership in the whole situation. And for me, there were a couple of things about him that really were striking. One, it was clear that he could identify with people who live in Ferguson, and that he could identify with the concerns that they had. The second thing is that it was clear he had empathy for people living in Ferguson, and in particular, that he could empathize with adolescent black males because of his own son and his experiences being a father. And I think when we think about what we want to see when we talk about community representation, is at the very least, we want to be able to see in our leaders, if they're elected, appointed, whatever, we want to see ourselves, and we want to see some capacity for understanding that these are people who can empathize with what's going on in the community and with what it means to be a Michael Brown. So the last thing that I want to say is, I wondered about who Michael Brown is or was, that he was about to make the transition that all of us have made, that is, summer before college. And so I think one of the last things we can think about is, how do we as a university prepare ourselves to help students make that transition, particularly if they're coming from communities like Ferguson, particularly if they have those kinds of concerns. So I'm going to leave it there. I've probably overused my time. But I'm going to leave it there and turn it over to
Thank you. First of all, let me commend you all for being here. This is a very important time. But there are facts and then there are facts. My journey over almost 29 years with the Detroit Police Department started for the very fact that I live in Old Redford, 6 Mile and Grand River, across the street from a precinct. Worked at Chevrolet Gear and Axle as a supervisor, wore a tie and shirt, had served my country for 4 years, went from enlisted to captain, came back home, started my education, living the middle class American dream. house, home, start a family in the city, but close to the suburbs, but working in an urban area. Civil Aid here in Axel, right at Holbrook and 75, right in the heart of urban America. I would work from 3 o'clock in the afternoon to 3 to 4 o'clock in the morning. Clocking the big check, making the check, driving a nice car. But every time at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, I would leave. I would hit 75 to Davison, to Lodge, to McNichols. Come up at McNichols, and between McNichols and the Lodge at 6 Mile, and McNichols and Grand River to Westbrook, I would get stopped every night. Almost, in my mind, and we talk about trauma, almost every night. 1972, late one evening, I'm driving. This was about the time that Black Panthers had engaged white police officers in the city of Detroit, and close to following the atmosphere of the riots, of 67 riots is still there. I'm stopped by 2 officers. One older white officer who tore my car up. Then I had this young white officer, obviously was a rookie. I said, I served in Vietnam. I know when you get that first encounter. And when I looked at the young man, he was standing there with me, and I'm saying, hey, calm down. Hey, don't move. Keep your hands on the car. And I'm going, my God, this guy's going to shoot me. He had the biggest, longest gun. It was unacceptable. I immediately went into the precinct, because it was right down the street, ran into the lieutenant, and said, I want to make a complaint. All right, go have a seat. And I sat there, and I sat there, and I sat there. I finally got up, dropped in my car, and drove home, which was right up the block. I made up my mind that I was going to do something, either from without or from within. My decision was to join the Detroit Police Department, against all of my family members and so forth. My mother, my sisters, my wife at the time did not want me to join the police department. But I felt this urge to do this. And let me say, at this point, it's the best thing to ever do. Anyway, once you are inside the bowels of a social institution and understand that the police department is a social institution, it exists for the people. The government has a social contract with you. You pay taxes and we provide security. That's our social contract. In that social contract, there's terms and conditions for each party. That social contract does not mean that I, as a police officer, should abuse you. I exist to protect you. In doing that protection, I have to establish who's a good guy or a good girl, or a bad guy or a bad girl. And it's sometimes difficult because you have those that are in the gray area. They either haven't been caught, or haven't adopted the lifestyle, or just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But as stated, each interaction has a trigger point, and it does not occur in a vacuum. The person you encounter has a persona, a mindset. You as a police officer have a mindset, a set of parameters, a lane for that particular point in time, what you see, what you ingest, how you think that you're going to react. Hopefully your training will kick in and you will reserve yourself, but at times you hit that edge and you do something that you wish had not occurred, or you could bring it back. I've shot at people and thought I had killed people. The most traumatic thing in my life. Chasing a guy, he's banging at me, I'm banging back at him. It's all Starsky and Hutch. He goes over a fence, I pop off a 45, it catches his leather coat, goes up his lining, catches the wadding in his leather coat and flips him over. But it flipped him over with such a force, I'm going, my God, I've shot this guy. It goes from Starsky and Hutch to, oh, now I'm out here in this world by myself. At the same time, you still have to effect the arrest. You still have to check on the person. But now you switched emotion from the adrenaline high to the sinking feeling till you get there. The guy turns over and looks at you, throws his gun, and goes, "Don't shoot." And you look at him and you say, "You dumb son of a," because of the emotion, the adrenaline. I'm more mad at him for having to shoot at him and make me chase him in this alley. And then he turns around and gives me this stupid look. Emotions. But let me go back from a larger mindset, from the individual encounter that happens in society. The give and take. The overcoming of the social and the traumatic situation that we talked about that drives all of us as humans at given points in time. Police officers are no different. Recent shooting, Ferguson. How many people? Ferguson? How many people heard about it? Some police agencies not racially balanced. Sunday, September the 27th. On July 25th in Anaheim City, California, police maintained a heavy presence in the street of Anaheim to guard against violent protests in the wake of fatal shooting of an unarmed man by an officer. The mother of Manuel Diaz, I'll stop there. How many of you knew about Anaheim? Well, 1, 2, 3. Where did you hear about Anaheim?
I heard about it on
Social media. Social media. British. Which one? Oh, in my class. In my class, I asked the students this very same question. They had not heard of it. They had 2 shootings in Anaheim. 2 shootings. Not just this Hispanic male, but another gangbanger shooting that the gangbanger was dead. But no social media. So what I'm telling you is that there are facts and then there are facts. And there's presentation of those facts that are yet to be determined. True. Let me say this for every shooting. There's an investigation for every time an officer discharges his weapon. There is an investigation by the supervisors in this unit. It is reviewed by the next highest level. It is reviewed by the deputy chief. If it results in an injury or a death, it goes to the prosecutor's office. And in the case of Mr. Brown, it can even go to the federal agencies. So what I'm telling you is this. There are personal issues involved in both actors. I'm going to tell you that they are both harmed by this. The young officer is forever changed. Take my word for it. He is forever changed. First of all, Mr. Brown, along with others, Trayvon Martin, the young lady on the porch, the 2-year-old Ayanna Jones, and others are gone. And so the larger question is, do we have a 1967 brewing over and over again with the conflict between the public and the police that is supposed to serve the public? Do we have a larger question that needs to be examined, the truth found, and dealt with? That's your job, not to accept the media framework, because there's some you never hear about. In this same period, there was 3 police officers shot and killed. Some things you will never hear about. The other thing is, believe half of what the media presents to you. And I'm going to say this from a faculty to the student. Investigate and find the facts for yourself. That's your job. That's why you're here in this university with this urbanized mission to provide you with a urban-centric education. Don't necessarily accept that this is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Don't accept what I tell you is the truth. to hold to, because it's slanted from my perspective. There are larger questions, social questions, training questions, technology questions. And you say, what do I mean by technology? I remember when we went from the wheeled 6-gun, Colt and Smith & Wesson, to the Glock 40 caliber. From 6 rounds, pow, 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 pow. Load one at a time, to all of a sudden, 45 and 14 in the clip. And all of a sudden, from pow, 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 it became World War III. Technology. Presenting police officers with a greater capability than may be necessary at a particular place at the time. So with that, I know that's a lot. It's a hodgepodge. This is a very in-depth subject. The takeaway from this is understand there's a lot of good police officers, but there are some bad. Understand there are some good police departments, and there are some others with issues. Understand that regardless of what has happened, it has happened and it is what it is. It is your job to make it the future. It is your job to make it the future. Take that job on. My decision was, that night of 1972, to do something about the situation. And God blessed me to go from police officer to have my health and safety to be here today after going through to be the chief and fire commissioner and 2 sons, one just retired, getting old, and I didn't force him into that, but there are a lot of positives to our police departments. There's a lot of positives to our communities. So let's not let this young man's death be the news obituary or whatever press framework it is. Let's find out for ourselves what's going on in America, what's going on with our police department, and what's going on with our communities to make this a better country. These are serious times. Thank you.
Pizza and pop in the hallway.
So your reward is coming. Okay. So thank you again to both our speakers. Fabulous. And I want to tell you why in particular is that fabulous to me, because I was going to get this conversation started by asking each of them a question, and they actually answered the questions that I was going to ask them. But I will ask the one question of Dr. Monday. Could you, and that question is basically over Trump. In my social media feeds on August 10th, the day after the shooting, the first topic that really came up was about the trauma of seeing Michael Brown's body lie in the street for what was described as 4 hours. That was the impact of the immediate trauma that was described in my social media. Did everybody, others have? Okay. That's what that was what was coming across my feeds. Could you speak to that? You spoke about trauma, so could you speak to that portion of the trauma specifically?
Well, I can and I can't. Right? Yeah. Because one of the things that I think both of us are saying is that this is an extremely complicated situation. And one of the things we know about trauma is that we know that people are more likely to be traumatized in certain circumstances, that is, witnessing or being exposed to a life-threatening event. But not everybody who witnesses or exposed to a life-threatening event is going to be quote-unquote traumatized. And that's because people have different strengths of resilience and capacity to cope. So on the one hand, it's difficult to say why or if or who's going to be traumatized in that situation. But it's also the case that we know both about trauma and the impact that the loss of somebody has on us, and you can go research this in the psychological literature. that when people lose someone through violent death, or they witness that even if you, certainly if you know that person, so we think about Michael Brown's family and his friends, but certainly if you know someone, even if you don't, it's really, the impact of that is really heightened both by the personal sense of loss that you have, by the fact that this happened so violently, suddenly, and unpredictable, and in a way it was unpredictable. If somebody is diagnosed with an illness and you know that the prognosis is not good, you're sort of preparing yourself for the eventual loss. But of course, this happens very suddenly. The other thing that the literature suggests is one of the reasons why sudden and violent loss is so difficult is because it often involves the fear and the concern about what has actually happened to a person. Is there disfigurement? Is there mutilation? And all of us, when we experience death, we don't believe that it's real, right? I mean, that's a natural part of the response to death. And so one of the concerns about this kind of a situation is, I think, both the issue of human decency, you know, you've got somebody in the street, but then what has happened to him? And I think about his poor parents, you know, wondering exactly what has happened. He's been shot. And so all of those things come together, I think, in such a way that really strike a chord. And I think that would be true regardless of the circumstance. He could have been shot by anybody in any kind of circumstances. So that part of the experience could happen in a lot of different situations. But the idea that this person has been shot in this way and then is just there for so many hours, and people are helpless to do anything. I know one thing that I remember seeing in video was, I don't know if it was a family member, I think it was, trying to go to him in the street, and the police, you know, holding him back, and they're doing their job, or they're doing the best they can, but you can imagine what that would feel like if you knew that that was your son, even if it's just a friend, you know, that was there, and you couldn't even go, you know, you couldn't get close to him, and then you had to just wait. That 4 hours must have seemed like forever. So I think that's the best I can do.
Can I add to that by saying that you do have a potential crime scene. There are procedures for handling crime scenes, and there are people who are responsible for transporting bodies. That's the medical examiner. It doesn't matter what the situation was, doesn't matter the trauma, doesn't matter the friction, doesn't matter the atmosphere. You have to wait for that county examiner to come and move that body. The other part of it as a crime scene is you want to be able to record what was the final position of the body, where was the head, where was his arm. When you move him, you have to look for residual evidence, maybe a weapon, maybe a knife, maybe a metallic item, because it is a crime scene. And potentially the police officer can be charged with murder or manslaughter or any number of crimes in between. And his lawyer, if in fact he is a rogue cop, if I can use that term from television, you want to make sure that all of your T's are crossed and all of your I's are dotted, because you want to make sure his lawyer and the courts don't put an officer back on the street. We had one officer that was involved in 7 different shootings, went through and was promoted to sergeant, because there is a procedure. The procedure is, when you have a shooting, you wait for the medical examiner to come and move the body. I've had police officers lay in the middle of the street for hours upon hours waiting for the medical examiner. So there is the trauma, there is the situational volatility, but there is procedure. And the procedure is you sterilize and contain the scene, especially a police-involved shooting. So that's probably why that occurred.
I think I can answer the question that was posed, and I think Dr. Mundy actually stated it in there. The question, I believe, initially was, why does this one impact us the way it impacts us, aside from the trauma that we feel from a post-traumatic stress point of view? I would equate it to this, and Dr. Mundy mentioned about the reality of the situation. How many people in here remember the Oklahoma City bombing? Okay. How many of you remember 9/11? What was the difference? Why did 9/11 resonate so much with people? Is because it was shown live. And so we were not just observers, we were almost participants in the tragedy that took place. And so we saw it unfold, and then we saw that plane hitting again and again and again, and it made it real to us. As a child, I tell my classes, you remember the early warning system about the tornadoes, and say you need to go take cover. As a kid, we just kept playing, and then in '97, we had a tornado hit Detroit. It made it real to people. And after that, we see with the flood. How many people now are going to go out and get flood insurance now? Yeah, because the tragedy became real. I think in this day and age of social media and in immediate visualization of what takes place, we are seeing things happen and unfold in real time, but we're losing the context around it. I think before, media has, and still has, in my opinion, a responsibility to provide the context into what you're seeing. And I think there's a danger when you just show things raw on the screen without providing any type of context. What Professor Wilson said is absolutely correct. There are logistical issues that have to take place that you owe both the victim and you owe the potential suspect in this case. But again, to just show things raw and then let it take on a life of its own, I think it makes it real to individuals that, wow, yeah, this could happen to me, but I'm here and I'm receiving almost what we would call vicarious victimization or secondary victimization, is now I'm getting all the raw emotions from those who are surrounded in the scene. And so I think the reality of the situation is why this resonates so much with individuals. We've had cases and cases before. I remember as a student here being in a very similar panel many moons ago with the Malice Green case. And we asked the same type of question then. Now the issue was did police go too far? The images that we saw were after the fact, ex post facto. So we were not live participants. And I think the fact that you are a live participant increases the trauma, if you will, that Dr. Mundy put forth, because it doesn't allow you to just be a spectator anymore. It makes you part of the process, and it makes you choose a side. And in a lack of context, you're going to choose that side that you have the most experience with. That would be my take.
Thank you. So we have a few more minutes scheduled for this program. I do want to open up the floor and make sure that if you have questions or comments that you have an opportunity as well. I see one hand here in front.
Yes. The reason why I was first to raise my hand, because being a part today of this discussion, one of the factors that the police and the media left out was whether there was a strand test done, meaning like drug testing through hair follicles. There are different types of drug tests.
Is that a question or?
So I'm saying, it's a comment. So I'm saying that someone in his family could have told that the man was on drugs, and that's why. It could have been a cousin, it could have been anyone in his family, it could have been his barber. That, there was so much controversy. It happened to him, it could happen to men, it could happen to women. I don't think we should focus so much on the riot part about it. I think we should focus on the information that was provided to us.
Yes. First and foremost, thank you, Dr. Wilson, for your service to the city. It's kind of a question between Dr. Mundy and Dr. Wilson. I'm not sure which one you can answer best. Dr. Mundy, it almost seemed like you suggested that there's like an ebb and a flow of trauma in the country as a whole. is there an ebb and a flow? I mean, is there, because what was the spark that sparked Ferguson? We know that there are a lot of factors. There's, police force is not necessarily racially biased. We know that there's a lot of different factors. But what was the spark? Why is there no spark in Detroit? Why don't we have people that want to, take to the streets in a peaceful protest? Or are we just going to tweet about it? We just tweet. That's what everybody does, and they just tweet back and forth about. And that's kind of like a peaceful protest meeting. But that doesn't make the news. We got 5,000 tweets. So that's just kind of my answer. But so why are there no spark? Why is there no spark here as opposed to there?
Yeah, I think this situation is very complicated, and we could analyze this from many different perspectives. And so I certainly don't want to present myself as somebody who's got a total understanding. I just wanted to focus on the things that I mentioned. But one thing I would say is that, and this is just my personal opinion about this, is that I do think that it makes a difference how people feel about these situations if they feel connected to their community. And I think one of the things we can thank Professor Wilson for is helping us to be appreciative of the function of public safety and law enforcement that's really there for the community. So I'm no sociologist, I'm no community psychologist, but my own thought about it is that there's something about people feeling out of touch with, alienated from, not connected to the police. And also, from what I understand about Ferguson, that might be true not just about the police, but other aspects of community life. And just one other thing I would say is that it's also clear that what happened in Ferguson in terms of the demonstrations and protests was aided considerably by people who don't live in Ferguson, by social media, by the hacker collective, anonymous.com. You have Al Sharpton, all due respects to Al Sharpton for those of you who need that, coming in. So it wasn't just a spark in Ferguson, but I think there was something of a vacuum there, and so you had other forces. But that's just my uninformed opinion about it.
I'm sorry, let's give somebody else a chance.
I was just going to say that case in point for what Dr. Wilson was speaking of, looking into the facts and having everyone here look into their own facts. I don't go on the internet, and I've honestly never heard of this. And so I may be the only one in here.
You've never heard of this?
Never heard of this.
Okay.
And so for me, when the facts were brought up at the beginning, I heard that Michael Brown was black, but I didn't hear if the cop was white or not.
He was white.
Okay. And also the protesters, I don't know the
They were
race.
mixed.
So for me, that was just kind of a case in point, just to how you do have to look into the facts to even see what's going on, because I can hear certain things from anyone that stand out just because for me, I'm a complete outsider. So.
Can I, one second. You have to understand that we went through a riot and devastation, and we saw the aftermath and suffered the aftermath. In this community, we have now what I call the old heads, the leaders who remember the devastation, who remember who the actual losers were at the end of the day. The area of 12 and where the riots took place is still not recovered. Again, we had another situation with the Bowden Bar incident, not too far from here, Illinois and Finkel. Calmer heads and the approach to that calmed things down. And then, of course, we had Malice Green. So we have a community, and we have police officers, and we have church leaders, and we have politicians that understand the devastation, and we're able to build a coalition to quickly get to the hot spots. We can't, I'm not saying we're stopping it, but we kind of know how to manage it by experience.
Classify what a hotspot is. Have a gray area.
That's a fair question, but I see some hands right here.
A store that you want to take over.
Go ahead, please.
I think some of it too, it just becomes, when you were talking about why it boils over, when you have, just from what I read, and, you know, having a family that lives in St. Louis, you have the community constantly making complaints about the police department that's 70% Caucasian, and the community is 80 to 90% minority African American. And they make complaints, and they see nothing done with those complaints. If there's no follow-up, you know, here you make a complaint against a police officer, and you got to go out to the board of police commissioners, and they're gonna send you a letter, they're gonna send a letter to them, and even if it's found that you didn't do anything wrong, it stays in your file forever as a complaint, whether it's sustained or unsustained. But when you get the community that's not getting any feedback on what happened with that investigation, and then sometimes they feel that their only recourse is to act out in that manner. And the proofs may turn out that the officer acted justifiably, but that was just the last thing. You know, you think about, we were just talking about, in my last class, we were talking about socialization and how people come up. There are a lot of people in St. Louis that came from the South. All my family came from Mississippi or Alabama, and they went to Missouri for better jobs and to avoid some of the racism from down south. So you go to that community, and so now you still have what they conceive as the Jim Crow mentality, and that's how you brought your kids up, and your kids that, you know, that whites have always tried to suppress us. And then it just boils and boils and boils, and then you throw into it the loss of jobs, economic hardships, the other things you have to deal with. At some point, there's enough, and it blows up, and you end up with those kinds of situations.
Okay, so let me, 1 second. So we actually have run out our official time. However, I see a couple more hands. Can we lend 10 more minutes of your time? 10 more, okay, great. Where's that hand? Okay, in the back, please.
My question is a little bit off of that course. I just wanted to know if anybody had a response to how do we prepare the youth as they're going into college that are from those environments? Does anybody have a response, being that we are in here right now? So we've made it, some people have come from such environments.
And the way I heard that was Dr. Monday's question to all of us. What, as a student body, or as members of this student body, that you're asking your colleagues, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Sir.
I have a suggestion on how to prepare youth that are entering college in a similar situation. My suggestion would be to have an orientation much earlier than pretty much shortly after high school. Those youth, male and female, who are entering college, go to some type of program for their prospective colleges, or if they're going out of state, maybe a community college that's in their state, in their community, that'll provide them with some, you know, just some things to do to get them away from those bad elements, to let them know that, you know, you've made it so far now, and you have a lot further to go, but you've made it this far, and these are the things that you're looking forward to doing, and that'll keep them away from, possibly keep them away from situations like that.
Are you suggesting, like, you remember the Birmingham protests where they would prepare people for being, you know, food thrown at them, racial slurs, everything that can be thrown at a person? Is that maybe what you're suggesting, that you try and prepare somebody for a racial slur so that a word can't hurt you?
No, not necessarily that. I mean, I understood the question to be how to prepare inbound college students that have come from a situation like this. There are youth in city of Detroit that don't have a lot of privileges, and they've made it that far. If we could give them something to do outside of high school, okay, you made it, you graduated high school, you've been accepted to college. Well, a lot of times the college orientation doesn't come until a week or two prior to actually starting school, starting your class. My suggestion would be to, if a week or two after high school graduation, you start some type of entrance program for college.
Sorry to interrupt you guys, but Charlene got a
A new voice.
I didn't have a question, I just had a comment from what you said. I believe that the action needs to take place before high school graduation, not after graduation.
Age 10.
Right.
In this
It needs
city,
to start early.
it's before 10. Let me say, first of all, I guess I can pop in on. Father Tim has service learning and leadership. You as a student, I as a faculty, you as a body in the Jesuit Mercy mission can get involved. I just did my first service learning in my aggression class. I also alternatively teach a school violence class. So I would look into addressing this issue through service learning. I would also say, from my experience working 9 years in gang squad, that if you wait to high school, it's too late. By high school, students have already formulated their next adult personality. They're either going to college or they're not. They're a gangbanger. Let me say this, and it looks like we're going to need a part 2 for this. We had a program where we went into elementary schools to talk to the students called Medical Education, Law, and Lawyers. They would build a team. And we would go in suit and ties and talk to these kids. And I did a couple of these programs, and I finally got tired. I said, wait a minute, how many of you know what crack cocaine looks like? Hands went up. How many of you had somebody in your family shot or shot at? How many of you had somebody heard shots in your neighborhood that night? Hands go up. What do? We get in the bathtub, or we go to the basement and hide behind the hot water heater. These are kids that are 7, 8, 9 years of age. Service learning and giving back to the community is our calling. So you students need to challenge us to be your leaders and facilitators, to work with Father Tim. We have Ford, I don't know how much money Ford Motor Company's got. They have a great year. And let's
One more new voice here. Dr. Finkenbein, I want to do a shameless plug before we leave. And upside.
I'd like to know y'all's opinion on L. Sharpton saying that Michael Brown was a gentle giant. Do you think that traumatizes the situation more by him coming out and making these remarks that a lot of people find inflammatory and incorrect?
Well, my opinion on L. Sharpton and Jesse Jackson is where you at now, not when something is already, we've got people that are always willing to come and make these sound bites, which they are good. This guy started preaching these words both of them when they were small. He was actually leading a church, so he knows the words to use, suppress the emotions. But that's not the end state. That's just a side issue. It is inflammatory. That's what they live and motivate and sustain themselves by. But it's really a side issue. This is why you're in college, so that those gentle giant and those frameworks don't form your opinion, that you're more educated, and that you're more dedicated, and that you're more diligent than that. So,
I just have a quick response, because on that same level, then we had a police department that was asked by the Justice Department, do not release this film of this thing happening at the liquor store. And he said, don't release that right now. We need you to hold off on that. So after the state trooper comes in and takes over the situation, the police chief released it after he was asked not to, and he released some other information as well. He never released anything about the police officer. So he's trying to shape the conversation too. And then he came back and said, well, I released this information because the media asked me to, from Freedom of Information. Well, somebody went in and did a Freedom of Information Act study and found nobody ever asked for that information to be released. Okay, and then I was listening on NPR yesterday. They were having a forum. NPR happened to be there. And the Ferguson police officers were out in the parking lot taking down license plate numbers. So so we talk about inciting things. We got to look at the people who are here that we pay to protect us. And I come from a long line and long family of law enforcement. My sister just recently retired. But, so we gotta look at what they're doing too. And so why do we need an Al Sharpton? We shouldn't need that. But we got the police putting out information they've been asked to not put out because it's gonna become incendiary, but they put it out anyway. And I personally think it was to undercut the state trooper when he came in to take over. Why would you release that if the Justice Department asked you not to? You know, so that's all I want to say.
Yeah, I was a little bit hesitant about some of the tone of the conversation. I think it's important to be proactive in helping young people from disadvantaged backgrounds not only be the best they can be, but maybe to look for things so they can avoid troubled situations. But there's sort of an implication in that statement that suggests that Trayvon Martin deserved what he got, or other people deserved what they got. And the reality is, for every Michael Brown who might have been a little bit off center, I don't know. You know, he could have taken those cigarillos and he could still have been a gentle giant. You know, and he was going to college. You know, we're imperfect people. But the implication is that there's a certain rationality to the process when some of these people are shot in these really bad situations by maybe a young policeman like the one you encountered who's nervous and is reading the situation all wrong. You know, we can train people to do all sorts of things, and if they encounter a situation like that, you know, rationality goes out the window and they still can end up dead.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, you know, I think you have to come from a different angle rather than suggest that we can do it through just helping young people who might be in these situations. Part of it is we need to have an informed racial discussion, and I'm very troubled by the fact that in polling, 80% of black folks want to have a national discussion on race, and only 35% of white folks. Because the other 65% are operating under the myth that everything's okay. Ferguson proved a lot.
We have a black person in the White House.
Right.
So civil rights has arrived.
Well, if I can just
I wouldn't say, the problem I have with that is
I'm just giving you a statement.
I know. That's a whole nother discussion.
If I can interject one other thing, I just had a long debate with somebody in the last month who is a white right-winger. And it was about Obama because, you know, I'm sick and tired of kind of what I see as a historian, kind of the unbelievably fierce and you know, Obama's not a perfect president, but the unbelievably fierce and biased criticism of him. And so I said, you know, I listed a whole bunch of things. I said, you know, why is it? Is it this, and I put in some loaded terms like your right-wing propaganda machine, things that I thought you'd bite at, right? One of the things I said, is it race? All of a sudden, it was amazing. Everything was about race. I'm stuck in the 60s. Race is not an issue in America. I'm like, oh, really? And he just kept bringing that, no matter what I said. Race. You can't talk about race. You can't talk about race.
Let's we have overspent our time, but let's begin the conversation there, because that is the element in the room for part two.
What is part two?
That is the element. Part two of that. 1 second, please. I do want to do a very famous for African American studies. We have one moment, please. Intro to African American Studies, what will be referred to as Intro to African American Studies, AAS 2000. These are the kind of conversations that we try to set you up for to have. We give you tools to have these kinds of conversations with your friends and on your social media. Please sign up for it on Tuesdays at 4 o'clock in the winter. I look forward to seeing you at part 2. Thank you for coming.
yeah, get to see them.
Oh, yeah?